Welcome back to the What's Your One More podcast. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. And, have you ever worked from home and thought about virtual reality space? Have you ever taken a job where you really haven't entered the office, but you've been able to do it from the comfort of a different location? Today's guest is for you. We're going to talk about how we make that happen and things that are going on in the virtual and AR world. I'd like to welcome to the show, Matt Cimaglia. Matt, welcome to the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're real excited. Matt is the CEO and co-founder of Third Summit, whose flagship platform, Alteon, is an ecosystem for production professionals that simplifies cloud-based workflows, asset management, and remote collaboration. He's an expert in cutting edge and with Web3 technologies with more than 2 decades of experience running an award creative agency. Matt stakes his reputation on relentless commitment to every project he takes on, a trait that earned his work at Cannes Lion and National News Emmy nomination. In addition to his nonprofit work in the arts sectors, Matt is also an avid cyclist and mountain climber, having once tackled and achieved Mount Everest with the same drive he brings to the workplace. Matt, welcome to the show today. It's an honor to have you on here.
Yeah, it's honestly, I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah,
it's been quite a week for us.
I can't wait to dive into that. I can't wait to share that with the audience. We had a chance to meet a couple of weeks ago, and you even kind of tipped your hand a little bit and said, "Hey, I can't tell you about this, but I'd love to delay this just a little bit so we could talk about this exciting week we're about to have." And that's something I think the audience is going to really appreciate hearing about. But before we dive into that, I loved your story when we got a chance to talk. You told me about it was interesting because you want to know how I even came up with like the concept of virtual workspace, and you started telling me about it. And I don't want to steal your thunder here, but can we go back to your days when you were with NBC and they would put you in the middle of the hurricane, essentially, physically the hurricane?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a product of Florida, so I've lived my fair share of hurricanes throughout life. And I mean, I even remember the 4th grade missing it because of the unfortunate events that happened for Hurricane Andrew. Mm-hmm. But, I think growing up, I always saw how infrastructure would be impacted by major events. So back in 2018, you were having a lot of hurricanes or a lot of wildfires that were happening in the world. And one of the companies that I used to do some work with, years prior, ended up taking on a lot of work for Carnival Cruise Lines because they were doing their call center support. And what was so fascinating about this is the organization that they were working with had a lot of call center employees in one single space and then quickly had to go remote. And so I saw that. And then, I thought about all of the different facets of various businesses that I've seen that were completely, derailed for weeks and just because their entire workforce was in one singular location. So again, I think that's a lot of decades of experience sort of culminated to create what we're now working on for Alteon. But to go back to your question, I graduated college and started a production company and quickly got a contract with NBC Network. And what was interesting about this time period too is they wanted to do a lot of more remote styling or remote style production work where everything was sort of more self-contained in the field as opposed to just sending all of the footage back to New York or one of the bureaus via satellite and then having to do all the work there. So I was part of this sort of test bed. And what was fascinating about it too is, they would literally, tell us all day, to drive up and down various coastlines wherever we thought our hurricane might be hitting. And by the end of the day, or whatever the time period was, we would be dead set on ground zero wherever a hurricane was supposed to make landfall. We'd hunker down in there so that we could actually report the news as it was coming in.
Wow. So literally you were thrown and thrusted into the eye of the hurricane, which is pretty incredible.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And when you think about it. And so, one of the things you told me was, hey, listen, when that would happen, you would often ask yourself the question, like, besides the living situation, how are people continuing to work? Like, how do they manage? How do companies manage? And it kind of led you to this concept, as you mentioned earlier, about virtual workspace.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the world just inherently was getting to this point where I saw it at my old production company where towards the sort of 2015 era of things, or even the 2010s to 2015s. Technology was starting to get democratized in such a way that I could take a MacBook Pro and go edit at a coffee shop. In that system that I bought off the shelf at the Apple Store would rival an $80,000 editing system that we had in our big giant office with couches and everything else. So I think just human nature caught up to the fact that like we should be doing things a little bit easier. We should be more efficient in our workplace. And if I don't have to be tied down to a specific location, that really benefits the overall, mindset and sort of creative juices, if you will, for when you're creating a particular production. And so we would allow our editors or production staff to go and take hard drives and go work at a coffee shop or go work at home, because also a lot of times, creatives like to work in the middle of the night. There's no distractions. So for them to go and be able to do their best work at when they want to do it, it was really critical. And so I think pulling together all of these different data points throughout the 2 decades that I was running that business really led me up to this degree of thinking, okay, we're in an era now where bandwidth is super fast, right? It's the fastest it's ever been,
right?
But it's the slowest it will ever be, which is kind of interesting to think about that.
Well put.
But when you would really get into the overall architecture of the cloud and having access to the cloud, the thing that was lacking most is the layer between the SMB market or small, medium businesses or independent content creators or influencers even, and the big cloud, right? It's really difficult. I mean, we have a team of almost 50 engineers that work on this daily that had to help Alteon or are working on Alteon building on the cloud. For an independent person, that's really not feasible, first of all. But then second of all, it's just a lot of work that we put into it. I mean, we're 4 years in and we're still developing this company. We'll never end. We'll never stop developing. But really to its core, Alteon is that thin layer. It is that bridge to be able to make it so that anyone can now have access to the cloud. And when you think about the traditional storage cloud workflows, they weren't built for creatives. They weren't built for people that are storing incredibly large files. They weren't built for people that needed orchestration engines in the background that were converting video files or allowing for comments to happen. And I know that I'm sort of speaking a little insider baseball there, right, for some people that might not be in the production industry. But when you think about those traditional again cloud providers, they were made for sending your large document to your accountant because you couldn't email it. It wasn't intended for video that was massive resolution. So that's what we've really done at Alteon, simplified that process for content creators to store their content and collaborate in the cloud.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic. And for our audience, just to kind of break down a little bit, that's a lot to unpack right there, but just to kind of go ahead and break it down, you're referencing what the everyday person's using: Google Docs, Dropbox, maybe even Apple Cloud, you know what I mean? Like your desktop in the cloud, you're storing documents, but from a collaborative effort to put a movie on there, if you may, it would be virtually impossible to garner enough cloud space, put that on there to where someone in Burbank could be working on something that someone in Florida could be seeing them do in the comments being put in there. There just wasn't a cloud space that was offered for that was even economically feasible for the average user like myself to use.
Well, and the other thing is contextually switching between every day. Right? No matter what business you're in, you're probably using 5 or 6 or 7 different applications every day. And you're having to contextually switch. Hey, where did I do that function? Or where did I store that file? Or where did I do this thing? Right? For content creators, you're balancing that plus trying to create something out of nothing. Right. And it's really something that you have to be laser focused on. And for Alteon, we always say that we're taking a lot of single purpose apps and bringing them into one ecosystem. And that's truly what we've done. And we're looking at other partners that we can work with that built something fantastic that we would never want to try and encroach on. But including that within the Alteon ecosystem is really part of the core value set of what we're building. And there are other areas where, as a business, we've made decisions to say, hey, look, we should build X because we think that we could build it really well. And it'll also keep our costs down enough that the everyday person could afford Alteon.
Wow. And so when you talk about ecosystem for our audience again, should they be thinking like operating system, or should they just be thinking essentially, when you hear Alteon, think something like, and I may be overstepping here, but think something like an Adobe package that has the functionality to do things inside of it. And you can have plugins, you can have additional software come in there, but we're going to give you a nice base and array for the average user to have. Is that how the audience should be thinking about that?
Yeah, I would think of us more as the operating system, if you wanted to put it in that context, right? Because we're not necessarily the tool that you're doing the work in, whatever collaborative capacity, but we're the sort of conduit for the media to the tool.
Gotcha.
So last year, for instance, we launched our integrations with Final Cut Pro, which is the Apple editing platform that they support, and from that perspective, we were able to bridge content that somebody, again, to give you a reference, somebody in Florida uploads a piece of content up to the cloud today, and then an editor in Burbank is able to pull that directly into their edit system through our native application that's hosted within Final Cut Pro. So that's a really unique characterization of how we're simplifying that workflow. In the other sense, again, using one of the more popular cloud-based platforms that you were referencing before, it would be, I've got to get a link, find wherever that was stored in my bucket, because it's not really organized in any specific way. It's just kind of scattered there. Mm-hmm. I have to download that onto my computer. I then have to drag that into a hard drive that I'm working on. And then I have to then import that file or clip into an edit system, right? That's 3, 4, 5 steps just to do one thing, where in Alteon, because it's housed directly inside of the application, it's one click. That piece of media is now located inside my editing application. And I want to stress, though, that it's not necessarily just for content creators. We've seen other companies that are using this, or even brands, for instance, that are on Alteon that are storing their media because they then go hire lots of different contractors that do work for them. So it's really important to highlight the fact that in the sort of old world, it would be, you hire a production company and they'd store your tapes for you. And then, digital came along, and now people are storing digital media files for you. And a lot of cases, they might not have, meaning the production company might not have the best in class storage that your organization or your brand might have. So why would you be trusting all of this valuable content with them? And with Alteon, we really streamline that process, but also it's incredibly secure. It's redundantly backed up. Our cloud partner is IBM, so best in class storage there in a data center that it would take a major catastrophic event in order to sort of take that media down. But again, sort of thinking through all of these different steps, it's sort of a logical approach for really anyone to get into the cloud.
Yeah, no, I love it. And speaking of Apple, if we could just maybe switch gears here a little bit, can we talk a little bit about that sneak peek of what you were saying you wanted to make? The announcement that just got released here a little bit. I think it was yesterday or Tuesday.
It was Monday. Yeah, okay. Monday was an incredible day for content creators as a whole, because I think that it opened up an entirely new avenue for people to create or express their vision for something. You're not just on a 2D plane anymore. You're in an incredibly augmented or virtual experience that you can provide to your viewers. What I think is so interesting, and I've said this a couple times with some other people, but going back to the silent film era, the Nickelodeons of the day, these were 8 to 10 minute films, and they were typically a non-linear narrative. Mm-hmm. And that means that you can step into the story at any point. So you'd walk into a movie theater, you'd pay your nickel, and you'd watch a piece of content that was displayed in front of you. And what was really interesting is during that time period, if you stepped into the theater during, halfway through, you'd stay and then watch it so that it loops back around and it'll start playing again.
Okay.
And then you'd watch until the point of like you saw the piece of content where you started, and then you'd probably walk out of the theater. So it was this very much a nonlinear narrative structure that happened. And what's so interesting is I think that we've gone completely back to that, where if I want to step into a virtual space or an augmented reality, I could put on the Vision Pro that Apple came out with, or some of the other companies that have their headsets, and really experience content in a very unique way. Or if you and I are watching the same story, I might see something in the corner of the room where you're seeing something up in the sky. And then afterwards, we can compare notes. And it's like, oh, I've got to go back and rewatch that piece of content because you saw something totally different than I did. So again, it opens up an incredible new world for content creators.
Yeah, and I'm floored by it. And I've only watched the keynote 3 times now to try to keep up with everything that's going on. I'm blown away by it. And I'm sitting there watching it with my 16 and 15-year-old, and they're already seeing things differently in the presentation than I saw. And they're already seeing different levels that it'll go to than what I'm thinking of. And, I just want to say congratulations, because I know that you have a stake in this. And it was a big day, like you said, for creators and for people like yourself. And congratulations for that new leap that you guys are about to take in that industry.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can't take any credit for Apple, but I think that what's incredible is the fact that we were able to quickly announce that we support 3D objects and augmented reality and virtual reality within Alteon. So content creators that are for the next 6 months or a year, however long it takes Apple to really get this thing out to the marketplace, because they weren't specific about that, but. What's great about it is it does give time for content creators to go build that level of product that will be going and displayed in these headsets. And I think what's also kind of interesting is, I look back at high def televisions. I remember going out in like the early 2000s and buying a flat screen TV, and the flat screen TV at that time period was, about 6 inches thick, and 42 inches wide. But I look back at that time period, and the only content I could watch was like the Nature Channel or something.
Right.
And that was on a loop because it was the only thing that my cable company could support in high def, or the only piece of content that was out there. So I think that it will be a couple of years before content creators can fully get into this more immersive experience. I think it's incredible that Disney's come out of the gate saying, look, we're going to support Disney Plus on the Vision Pro. And I think that, that is just also showing how innovative of a company they are to say, look, we see this new medium. We see a new opportunity here for an entirely new experience of our content. Yeah,
no, I agree with you on that. And the other thing that, speaking of HD, if we could just for a second go back in time, I'm so glad you brought that up. When you left NBC and you went to Chicago to start essentially a digital storage and production company, do you mind sharing that story with the audience about Dateline and the things you were telling me a couple of weeks ago about how when they went to produce their first couple shows in HD, that they had some cameras lacking and they needed some help there. I thought this was just great when you were telling me this.
Yeah, so I didn't get into the digital storage space until just a few years ago, but we had lots of servers in my office at the time that we were very unique in the sense that we were just eating up data left and right. And at this time period, I think we had about 0.5 petabyte of data, and this was mid early 2000s, and so for anyone to have that amount of space was just astronomical. But we were contacted by Dateline at the time period where they said, look, we wanted to edit high def Datelines, and they couldn't at the network because they didn't have the infrastructure to be able to handle it. So everything from their servers down to the entire workflow that they had, again, just could not handle high def Datelines. And so we were able to build shows for them. So we started with probably about 3 or 4 a year, and then that scaled up over time. But it was so fascinating because here I was running a business out of Chicago or a production company, and we did a lot of branded content and commercials and online video, which I had to. I remember looking back at some decks not too long ago of trying to convince my clients that they should put video online. And I remember walking into boardrooms and telling CMOs this, and they just looked at me like I was from Mars, which, nowadays it's like, that's the only thing people do. But going back to Dateline, again, it was really incredible for us because it just showed how, forward focused we were on technology and really trying to cobble together things of the day to make new workflows and to build, a new audience for what we were trying to create. And fast forward to about 4 or 5 years ago, again, pulling all of those data points together, I had exited my production company, and I was really scratching my head, and I was doing some consulting and some innovation work, and it really was this light bulb moment for me that said, look, I've had this experience that's very unique. I've probably worked through every workflow anyone could mostly do in the content creation space. Why not use that to good? And I really genuinely feel like I've built a platform for my peers. I was the crazy one that actually said, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to put it together, because everyone always talks about a way of improving the way that they do their business. I don't care what business that is or what function it is. You always think about, well, how could I do this better? How could I make this more efficient? And that's really what sort of the general thesis behind Alteon was at the very beginning, and still stands today.
No, it's fantastic. You said something, and your timing of what you just said maybe had to go back to my notes when we first talked. And you said, in 2008 when you were in Chicago, and then even fast forward to 2022, you said in times of economic decline, there's always an opportunity. And I love that statement.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes. Yeah. And I wrote that quote down because I was like, make sure to bring back up on the podcast, because I love it, because that goes for any business. In times of economic decline, there's always an opportunity. Whether you're a salesperson, whether you're an inventor, whether you're a creator, there's always an opportunity. And I love the fact that leaders think of that way. And I wanted to commend you on that statement, because in 2008 you did it, and now you're doing it again. And in this cycle, and I just hats off to you guys and what you're doing right now, which leads me to my next question about the AR space. What's next for that in the next 5 years? What do you see in that world? What do you see in that space?
Well, really quick, before you get into the AR thing, I just want to bring up one more comment about economic decline or catastrophic events or anything like that. So back in 2019, I had a really strong stance on we needed to think about a remote workflow environment. And we broke ground. We started first coding for Alteon in December of 2019, knowing that we would have about a 5-year uphill battle to get into the creative space and try and convince people to do a little bit more of a remote workflow. Then fast forward 3 or 4 months, the world shuts down, and people are calling up saying, hey, how can I log into your platform? I read this article about you. And we were like, we just came up with the name. I mean, it was really kind of this perfect storm moment for us. But what was great about it is we stayed the course. And I think that's important for any entrepreneur, not to just jump at the shiny object or jump at an opportunity. And it was painful for us to stick to our plan of we're going to build this over the next couple of years before we launch. I mean, it was incredibly painful because we saw such huge market opportunity in front of us, but I didn't want to just quickly speed up development or quickly just launch one part of Alteon, because I feel like the users wouldn't have seen the full vision, or they wouldn't have been able to really utilize it in such a way that we intended for them to do and have a great experience on the platform. So we really stuck to it. And then we launched in April of last year for the platform. And again, it's been really great since then. But to your AR question, right? Where do we see that going, and where do we see the space going? Look, I think that it's we have been given a shot in the arm by Apple saying that they're now entering the race. I think content creators as a whole, I personally have been involved in the AR space or VR space for probably close to 10 years. I was I actually, funny enough, I was at NBC in 2015, and I actually pulled up an old picture from this pitch that I did where I was pitching virtual reality to the network, and they all looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, "This is sorcery, right? Like nobody could ever do this." And then I popped a makeshift, it was like the Google Cardboard, and I put my phone in it, and it was a really low resolution phone, whatever that time period was, but it still showed off such an incredible experience of being inside of a news story or being inside of a piece of content. And so I really look at it from the perspective of that didn't succeed back in 2015 because a lot of the market really wasn't adopting it, and there wasn't really a good viewing mechanism.
Understood.
And so I think that today, moving forward to what happened on Monday with Apple's announcement for the Vision Pro, it really is, again, going back to what I said, that shot in the arm for the entire space to wake up and say, okay, there is a ecosystem now that exists where there's multiple players in the space, and the biggest players of all. And I think what's great about Apple, and why I think that now it's going to succeed even more, is the fact that there's a lot of people that have already developed apps for Apple without knowing it on ARKit, because ARKit has existed for many years. So it's been almost hiding in plain sight.
Wow.
So you have a group of developers that are very familiar with Swift or very familiar with ARKit, which again has been a coding language around for many years that Apple has their developers on. And so because of that, and because people are already familiar, I think it's going to be a lot easier for creators of all natures, right? Not just app developers, but I'm talking about 3D artists or even storytellers to create their mechanism or their app for this headset. And I think it's just an incredible time period for that.
So this adaptation period that you're referring to, it's already been happening in the background. So the acceleration of the growth of this could be much greater than, we normally would anticipate. So instead of something that may take like 5 years to kind of get to a level, it could take, 2, because it's already been going on in the background for so long.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what do you think it does for something like this on a podcast? What does it do for something like this? Like how can that change our space? Right now we're Zooming. Right now we're seeing each other on camera. But I mean, with this, is there an opportunity, and pardon my ignorance here, is there an opportunity where you have the headset and I have the headset and we can record literally being in the same room at the same time?
I think the greatest thing is we don't know.
Okay.
I genuinely, I think that's the greatest part about it. So I'm gonna butcher this story a little bit. But I was told this by a correspondent that I used to work with, that there was an old story of a farmer, and this was back in the early 1900s. There's a farmer and they wanted to do a radio show or something along those lines. And again, somebody fact check this for me so I can get all the facts right on this. But essentially they wanted to do this radio show, and the telephone poles were, several hundred yards away. So what the engineer did is they just clamped the radio mechanism that they had to boost the signal into the fence at the farm, and the fence then connected to the telephone lines. But if you think about it, it's just transferring electricity, right? You're just pushing that signal through. So it worked for that time period. Never did those people think that we would even be doing a phone call like this or a radio show like this today, where I could see you in full high definition and you can hear me an incredibly crisp sound. Right. I think that's what's so exciting about this, is that we don't know. But if people stop innovating and if people stop trying, then this type of interaction will never take place. And, we can speculate all day long on all of the advances that we might have for this, or, what impact it'll have for the medical community, right? What impact it'll have on people that are overseas, all of that stuff. It's just incredible to see sort of where we've been and where we're going.
No, it is incredible. I can't wait to see what comes of it. And, even in our line of business, that was part of what I was thinking about. And, with my kids, my son's thinking about being immersed in the game, not like physical game, but like watching a game on TV. And, my daughter was seeing it for all of, the you could almost travel without traveling. You could go see places that you would never see before and feel like you're there. And it was kind of neat to hear their take on that and their concepts on what is to come.
But what's interesting about all of those comments is the fact that someone needs to go out and film that. Someone needs to go out and capture that. And where do they store that footage?
There you go. Well, I think we might know a place, right?
Yeah.
Well, hey, I know you were pressed for time today. I know you have a hard stop here. Matt, thank you so much for being on the show today. I can't thank you enough. If our audience wants to learn more about Alteon, where would they go find that out?
Alteon.io is the best place to go check it out. And, we have a customer support staff always around 24/7. So if anyone has any email questions or comments, feel free to just shoot us a note and, we're there. And again, I want to stress that it's such an incredible time period for technology as a whole. And we're seeing so much innovation that has come out of even the pandemic in the last couple of years, right? We're seeing even the telecommunications industry wake up to putting in stronger fiber lines or, increasing home networks to match what you might have traditionally had in a business, because you have to keep up with these demands now of remote workers. I think there is a little bit of a loss of that, serendipitous moment or those inspirational time periods where, you're passing somebody at the water cooler and you're talking about, something that, a problem you might be working on or just a question that you might have about the business. So I'm not fully all in on the remote side of things. I think that it's important to have those physical connections with people, but certainly it streamlines a lot of what we're trying to do in society and accelerate your businesses. So I think that, for any entrepreneur to just constantly, do those moonshots, just think of all the what ifs and go for it genuinely, and fail, right? Fail early.
Good
and
point.
then learn from those mistakes, and then, but continue going on, dust yourself off. I've certainly had a few of those moments in my life, but, it doesn't stop me every day because I know genuinely what I'm doing is going to have a greater impact. And we receive that information all the time from our users. And that's what's exciting for me, is hearing about the commercial or hearing about the documentary that's being produced on top of Alteon that, is really changing people's mindsets or invoking some sort of emotion. And that's really exciting for me to see where we're going with our company.
I love it. And I think what I just heard you describe is the fourth revolution that's taking place out there. The fourth revolution has been described a lot by a lot of different people, and it sounds like you're doing the same thing, describing it as well there. So it's pretty incredible. So Matt, thanks again for being on the show. If you like what you're hearing, please 5-star this podcast, leave a review for us. We love the comments, especially on our YouTube channel. If you hit subscribe, leave the comments. We love addressing those. We love coming back after them and talking them over with our audience here. And then if you would, again, check us out on our socials at What's Your One More. That's What's Your One More with the number 1. Matt, thanks for being on the show again today. Really appreciate your time and all the insight you're bringing. Excited to see your future as you guys progress forward here in this next digital age that we're moving into.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
Absolutely.
I got one more shot, I'm gonna make it. One more chance, I'm gonna take it. I meant it when I said it, now it's time for me to do it. I got one life to live, so I put my all into it, yeah.